Shalom and welcome to another episode in our series called Faith Journeys with God in the Land. Today I'm standing on one of the peaks of Mount Gilboa, and we'll be talking about the issue of pride and humility. I love the view that we get here on top of Mount Gilboa. It's actually a mountain range on the south side of the Harod Valley, which is the eastern finger of the Jezreel Valley. Now we're walking eastward for a great view of the Jordan Valley further east and the hills of Gilead on the other side of the Jordan Valley. A great view here from the Gilboa range. Now this range is mentioned in the Bible, specifically 1 Samuel 31, where we read about King Saul. And this is where we sort of pick up the theme of pride and humility. Now, King Saul was Israel's first king, and he was anointed by Samuel. And he led a fairly long life. He had 3 sons, but he battled continuously against the Philistines. Now, already at this point of Saul's life, even prior to David's battle against the Philistines themselves and Goliath specifically in the Elah Valley, David was already anointed king. So Saul was very jealous of David after he killed Goliath. And as it turns out, David, who was, as I just mentioned, already anointed to be king, he grieved after he found out what happened here on Gilboa. Now, the Philistines, who had 5 primary cities on the coastal plain in the Shvelah, they were Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. They ended up battling the Israelites and King Saul here in this area of Gilboa. The Philistines were positioned down below between the Gilboa range and the hill of Moreh. And Saul and his 3 sons took position here on Gilboa. And what happened is that Saul knew the outcome of the battle, and it did not look good for him. So he saw the Philistines coming. He decided to take his own life, and he and his 3 sons died somewhere here on Gilboa. Now, that's a tragic end, but what probably brought that tragic end was his pride. Now, right over my shoulder, you can look eastward to the area of Beth Shan. Now, Beth Shan was where the bodies of Saul and his sons were taken by the Philistines. They were hung on the town square walls of Beth Shan. And then people across the way come and rescue the body of Saul. Saul, of course, was headless at this point. The Philistines cut off his head. Why? Because David did the same thing, in part, as a way of dishonoring your enemy. David cut off the head of Goliath, and the Philistines are now doing the same to King Saul. But Saul had a troubled life. Of course, at first he was called. He knew he was called by God. He was anointed by Samuel. And yet I think pride is what got in the way. His leadership really wavered. He was a troubled person. But by the time he comes up here and faces the Philistines for one last time, again, Saul is so desperate that he seeks out the advice of the witch, if you will, at Endor, which is just down below on the slopes, off the slopes of Gilboa. He's so desperate that he sort of runs around the Philistine army just to get word of what might happen to him. But then he commits suicide. He falls on his sword. His sword bearer would not do this. And Saul, unfortunately, dies a very a proud man, I should say. In our walk of faith with God, what often happens is that our pride limits how God can use us. Sometimes we think too much of ourselves, and that really gets in the way of God using us. And what is really needed is a careful understanding of who we are. We're simply sinners called by God's grace. And there's really nothing to be proud of is in terms of ourselves earning God's grace and salvation. I think Saul came to this point in his life a very proud king. And I think this was what really took his life. He really was, what can I say? He lost sight of his humble calling and died a very troubled man. The view from here, by the way, is spectacular today. We're looking all the way across the Jordan Valley to the hills of Gilead. And the view from Gilboa is really tremendous this afternoon. But perhaps in our faith walk, maybe we can be encouraged, or maybe we can encourage one another to walk humbly and honestly with our God, who calls us out of darkness, who calls us to be sons and daughters of God, not by our own virtue, but by the sake of his grace, by his grace, and for the sake of his glory. We are to live our lives out as humble as we can. So be encouraged today and live out a humble life as we enjoy this view from Mount Gilboa here along the Harod Valley. Until next time, shalom.